دكتور جان لسه اوكي؟
ايش تعمل اطلم؟
لسه
نه استایش نیه دبی اجازه بده.
سلايد كي شركة.
اوکی. او فایل دبینن گیان.
بله تا استایک دکتور جان.
باشه گیان جرا واسطه.
منه.
Okay, first of all, let me to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at this symposium. And I'm happy at least there is one person who needs the English presentation, and that is David. Good to see you, David. So my presentation was supposed to be about economic reform in Kurdistan. Actually, I spent about 3 months. I wrote a paper about economic reform in Kurdistan. But at the end, I was not satisfied with set of recommendations. So I will not present that one. Instead, I present something has to do with economic reform also. Is about the curses effects on Kurdistan regional economy and self-sufficiency. So my presentation, I first introduce you to some background of the problem, the curse of natural resources, development of oil and gas industry, institutions, transparency and accountability that former speakers also talked about, the state of oil and gas and agricultural sectors, limited development capacity, and also the role of two sectors in regions' development, some summary and policy recommendations. So I start with the background that Kurdistan region was an agricultural society in stage of transformation to like a normal development society to industry, service, and information technology society. But the difference is Kurdistan region is a consuming society, not a really passing those stages of society's development and transformation. So the rapid urbanization, political rent-seeking, and business-driven development strategy had led to high dependency on hostile neighboring economies, and also dependence on oil and gas extraction. And this extraction, as the former speaker also mentioned, is by foreign oil companies, not local labor. So the region suffers from triple curses, and one is the natural resources, another one is inefficient and rigid culture and institutions, and the third one is the education system training mostly inefficient public servants. So there is a desire to diversify the scope of the economic activities, source of revenues for the government and the public, and also promote national interest and increase the region's self-sufficiency. But this is only a desire, basically, very difficult to achieve those. Then one needs economic diversification that is a long-term solution to high economic dependency, curse of natural resources, and an inefficient institutional structure. So this diversification can take place in different sectors like agriculture, in industry, and in services, and also in both private and public sectors. So diversification of private sector refers to private sector development and generation of new sources of income for the population. Diversification in public sector can be achieved through downsizing the inefficient public services provision and also privatization of some segments of the public services that are effective through private provision. So diversification of public revenue through development of, for instance, national taxation system and broadened tax base can take place. A combination of those three measures of diversification can diversify the economy and reduce dependency on natural resources. But I'm not very optimistic that this is possible in Kurdistan region, because in my view, the region is a failed region, and the people of Kurdistan have failed when it comes to achieve their goals. So if we look at resource-abundant countries, for instance, Nigeria, Ghana, Bolivia, Venezuela, Iran, and Iraq, they have failed to utilize their natural resources well to develop their economies. The curse causes lower economic growth, corruption, inefficiency, high dependency, and human resource waste, and also in case of Kurdistan region, even brain drain. That is something that is very important for the region. Then some countries like Finland, Norway, Canada, Australia, they have been successful examples of resource-rich and extractive countries. Then we have countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Singapore, who possess mainly skilled and disciplined human resources, and they skipped resource curse and able to develop and grow fast in accordance with their plans. So the newly industrialized economies are serving as a role model for recent tiers of emerging economies that are, for instance, India, that is one, and also Vietnam is another. So challenges facing oil and gas exporting countries are not only economics, but also institutional, social, and especially political. Then the economy of Kurdistan region has developed rapidly in recent years. We cannot deny that. It heavily depends on revenue from oil and gas industry. One can suspect that oil may cause socioeconomic ills in the society. And here I try to look at the curse of oil and gas in the Kurdistan region. We look at possible link between this curse of oil and gas and fast-growing consuming service sector, the decline of agriculture sector, the slow development of industry sector or negligible development, increasing inequality, and drastic asset concentration. So those are like the signal of this link to the curse of oil and gas industry. The mixed curse and blessing effects and other areas include, for instance, we cannot say oil and gas had only negative effect, but they had also blessing effect. That is, for instance, investment and development of education, labor market, manufacturing, public employment program, bureaucracy, corruption, business-driven development strategy, and concentration of assets. All those are like effects of this oil and gas sector. Then we need diversification into other areas along the value chain, other resources, other sectors, self-sufficiency, and export. Without export, without competitiveness, productivity, competitiveness, export, and exchange, there is no way that a society in our globalized world can develop. So the right to control and manage its oil and gas resources, better security, and serving as a gate for Iraq should KRG to develop the oil sector, made the region to develop its oil sector. The proven resource reserve is quite huge in both oil and gas in the region, and the region is divided into different exploration blocks that is dominated by these international oil companies, and the oil contract signed is mainly revenue sharing, where the companies develop the industry infrastructure. Entire world natural resources are nationalized, but the opposite of all those in Kurdistan region, through this model of profit sharing, they have almost privatized the sector. So Turkey operates and KRG has built pipelines to transform oil to the global market, and the oil extraction can bring both opportunities and also risk. The risk is like dependency is one of the risks. So public policy should promote the blessing and prevent the curse of oil and gas, rent seeking, and also privatization of natural resources and public services for profit making. So the Dutch disease is a shift away workforce from agriculture and development of industry toward petroleum and service sector. So telecom, transportation, wholesales and retail, tourism and hotels, agriculture and construction, they have developed differently in the era of oil and gas exploitation. The region faces challenges, for instance, to invest in agriculture and industry sector, and these two sectors' share of the GDP is extremely low to be considered as a strong base industries in the society. So it is difficult to develop industry sector because of lack of industrial policy and qualified labor, underdeveloped universities, landlocked region, business-driven development strategy, inadequate infrastructure, inability and lacking interest to develop and protect local production. That former speaker also mentioned all of those factors as a lacking factor. So low and volatile oil and gas market prices is another economic challenge for the region, which is frequently being facing in recent years. So government increases the public spending, causes budget deficit and reduced growth. It can manage through resource fund building, diversification of production, and a proper taxation system. Those are the solutions. Two of my former students, they have written their PhD thesis about first institutional design and capacity to enhance effective governance of the oil and gas wells, the case of Kurdistan region. This is published a few years ago by Hazal Auzer, and a second one defended at University of Kurdistan, Howler, about natural resource dependency reduction in the economy. What are the effective factors? And both of them, the first one is published in the Springer series in Middle East, and the second one, it will appear in 2023. So these are good reading about this oil and gas sector. This is discoveries and development of blocks in Kurdistan region that is published in 2015. And it shows evidence of how much natural resources has been given away for little development outcome. And this model is a profit sharing that KRG is using. And you can see that oil and gas industry, they cover their expenses, plus they get part of the profit, and rest of it is channelized in different way through royalty and sharing profit to KRG. And this is a Ministry of Natural Resources organization that is, despite its complexity and covering different needs, it's very much different than the one that we have in Norway. Norway is the only country in the world that's safe for future generation. Every other countries are borrowing and the future generation. So that's why I think it would be good that KRG looks at this model that is applied in Norway, that engages different ministries like Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, Finance, Labor, Fisheries and Coastal Affairs, and also Environment, plus lots of other agencies. And it has a governance pension fund, and which is very unique. And Kurdistan could take advantage of this and learn from it to develop their own way. So another reason for adverse development experience of resource-rich countries can be quality of governance and inefficiency of national institutions that most economists and policymakers, they agree on. Resource-abundant countries with strong institutions have higher performance. I gave you an example of, for instance, Canada, Scandinavian countries, Australia. And weak and inefficient institutions cause a decline in productivity of the economic sector. And we need research on economic management, governance, politics, legal issues, environment, technology, and social aspects that helps to identify the weaknesses of the institutions and the needed structures of the petroleum sector. The current Kurdistan institutions, in my view, they are suffering from lack of separation of rules that causing stronger negative curse effect than they are facing like traditional resource-rich countries. So transparency is the right of the public, an obligation by the government, and the key factors to avoid mismanagement and prevent social conflict. So transparency prevents corruption and rent-seeking. Some groups block political reforms to protect their own rents. Is not something that is unique for Kurdistan region. It's a global phenomenon. An example of active, non-transparent activities by KRG are lack of accountability, public statistics, and national account. We don't even have Bureau of Statistics. It was during Saddam's time, was very good as everywhere else about statistics, about agriculture, demography, and education, basic education. But they shut down the Bureau of Statistics, and Ministry of Plan actively prevented creation of a Bureau of Statistics. It wanted to keep the monopoly over limited statistics in-house, that they should be criticized for that. So transparency can lead to cooperation among political parties and in relation to federal government, and it can reduce public mistrust in KRG and intergovernmental conflict. So publication of information and all contracts, revenues, public spending will build trust between government and the society, reducing corruption, abuse of power, and rent-seeking, limit rent-seeking behavior. The natural resource sector has three groups. That is oil companies who extract, government who regulate and spends the revenues, and the general public who benefits from public services and development programs. I already mentioned about the importance of accountability to prevent corruption and mismanagement of resources, and also openness when it comes to public procurement in the national interest, not in the interest of foreign companies who are active in Kurdistan. And also revenues are to be invested in, revenues are invested in imports, resulting in inequality, concentration of assets, and increased public mistrust, because the economy is basically import and distribution based, because of the flow of import and distribution can be faster than building up local production and capacity. So growing asset concentration in few hands with political influence has resulted in business-driven development strategy. So the development strategy is basically decided by the business sector in private interest, not in national interest. That's why I call it business-driven development strategy. Then I already mentioned something about the oil and gas sector, how important it is, and capital management and advanced technologies can result from utilization and development of oil and gas sector, but it has not been like that. And labor force lack skill, and manufacturing industry, it never took off. And the differences in sectorial growth rate is a result of business-driven development strategy, lack of national protective regulations, and a clear industrialization policy. So this business-driven development strategy, that is source of all ills and lack of development, is a result of influential decision-makers that focus mostly on own business and regulation toward short-term planning and profit, and politics, governance, business relation, weak higher education system, and absence of transparency, accountability are main reasons for the unbalanced economic development that I wish that never fulfilled. Agricultural society is evolution of agricultural society is divided into resistant prior to the 87, destruction 88 to 90, self-ruling 91 to 95, all for food program 96 to 2002, and federal governance 2003 and onward. And there is a description of all of each of one of those periods that I don't want to waste time and go through all of them. But during the federal governance era, import-based business prospered and local production was completely neglected and declined. What we need is basically capacity building, and this capacity building should target employees at the ministries and associated agencies, public agencies. It should be divided into planning, policy, regulation, research, training, extension services, evaluation, and feedback to policy making. To shorten my presentation, not taking much of your time, what we need basically, I skip this petroleum and agriculture. I go to the summary. In my view, the region depends on the rapidly developed oil and gas sector and imports of material, service, and skilled labor. Material, I wrote actually a whole book of the economy of Southern Kurdistan. There I recommended that they should start with the mining industry to produce material, and material will be used in construction and build up capacity to become a model and open the market in rest of Iraq but unfortunately, every single thing's material was imported. I can ask you now, look at what you are seeing in the room that you are. Look at your eyeglasses, pen, pencil, clothes that you have, shoes, chair you are sitting on, the desk, the projector, every single thing in that room. If you can find something that is of size of a needle, that is using Kurdish material and made by Kurdish, then I will be ashamed in front of you that I'm lying about failed development in Kurdistan. So oil and gas revenue can be used to develop and diversify the region's economy. Region pursues reduction of dependency on oil and gas through investment in the services and industry sectors, which services are consuming and industry is in infant stage. Industry sector still is in infant stage, and it requires research to identify the weaknesses to develop its management and planning. And transparency, accountability, and efficiency in resource management is needed to develop to meet the public demands. Challenges associated with resource curves impacting agriculture sectors. We know already those weaknesses. A reform and developed agriculture sector can form a major and diversified economic pillar that is absolutely necessary in parallel with the industry. So the aim must be to achieve the national goals and openness, self-sufficiency, inclusive growth, and sustainable development to increase ability and flexibility to mitigate the negative impacts of resource curves and to promote natural resource blessing in enhancing the Kurdistan region's growth and development. In Kurdistan, they have a dual currency that increases the flexibility by reducing transaction cost of exchange, no fear of currency devaluation and repatriation of profit by foreign investors, but it has not been really exploited effectively. So the comprehensive long-run economic plan is important, where oil revenue management is a significant element of this long-run economic plan. To build oil and gas managerial model, example, I gave you a Norwegian model to promote the blessing and to prevent the deeper curses effects. So diversification with emphasis on balanced development of production of mining, industry, agricultural and service, and even development towards information society. Then introduce progressive taxation system to smoothen the flow of public resources, reducing dependency on gas and oil export. create a stabilization fund of oil and gas revenue to use in active public stabilization policy. Institutional capacity building in planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and feedback to policymakers is needed. And for that, we need lots of statistics. Introduce regulation policies of investment, import, taxation, environment, education, leading to able, accountable, and transparent decision-making. So we have to decouple the governance from influence of politics and business that aims to strengthen their profit. And in this way, we strengthen the blessing of natural resources. So one needs to be dynamic, adaptive, and be development-minded and national building and development-minded. Invest in capacity exchange and self-sufficiency, promote national interest and ways of thinking, reform the politics, institution, governance, and legal institutions, education, and economy. And in order to reform the economy, it is impossible to do that without reforming politics, institutions, governance, legal system, and also stronger education. There is no way you can reform the economy. That's why I did not present my paper. I wait for improving the recommendation before I present it, probably at World Kurdish Congress in March next year. So we need to introduce high civil servant examination. High civil servant examination, this means if one is minister, prime minister, or a director, they have to go through to pass some high civil servant examination to be able to function in their capacity. Discourage politics, governance, business relationship, but promote government, university, business cooperation. Produce statistics, promote evaluation, transparency, accountability, abolish practice of tribalism, nepotism, nomination of lifetime high-ranked positions that cannot do their job, higher education and development policy financed by natural resources can be inclusive and target actually greater Kurdistan, not only Kurdistan region. In my view, one reason for failing of Kurds is not only our low quality education, inefficient governance, corrupt governance, but also we need to establish national legal team that consists of retired internationally experienced lawyers and diplomats assisted by local national lawyer to work with documentation and preparation of legal national cases and crime against Kurds. The crime cases includes like Halabja, Anfal, forced migration, displacement, genocide, destruction of rural areas, landmine, Arabization of areas, appropriation of land, imprisonment, torture, killing, discrimination, and many other forms of aggression against Kurds that has taken place, but not one single one of them has been solved because we do not have an able national legal team that can take on these issues. The legal team's activities to cover also other national and intergovernmental and international relations and agreement which area of national interest and where KRG or Kurds in general currently low or no capacity to manage this kind of issues. So establish, yes.
2 minutes to go, Dr. Jan, if you could just maybe jump to conclusions.
Actually, there is only one line left, three lines left. So we need to establish victim compensation fund to support the state survival families of victims and also finance the national legal team and deter effectively future crimes against Kurds. So I thank you for your attention. I'm done with the presentation.
Thank you
and
very
I'll be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Heshamti.